From the outside, my life was perfect. I lived in a lovely 2-story house with a white picket fence, the kind you see in movies. I spent my weekends in the garden, coaxing roses to climb the trellis and planting rows of bright yellow daffodils. Our golden retriever, Buster, would nap in the sun while I worked. My husband, Leo, was the man every woman in our town seemed to dream of. He was handsome, with a charming smile that could light up a room, and he always knew the right thing to say. He would bring me flowers for no reason and tell our friends, loud enough for me to hear, "I'm the luckiest man in the world." And then there was Clara. She wasn't just my best friend. She was the sister I never had. We'd known each other since we were 5 years old, sharing secrets, clothes, and dreams. She was at our house so often that Buster treated her like a second owner. We were an inseparable trio: Leo, Clara, and me. To everyone who knew us, we had it all. But every perfect picture has a shadow, and mine was named Beatrice, Leo's mother. She would visit without calling first, her sharp eyes scanning every corner of my home for flaws. Her insults were always disguised as advice. "Amelia, dear," she'd say, running a gloved finger over the top of a picture frame, "a little dust can make a whole house feel sad." When I spent all day making Leo's favorite meal, she would taste it, smile thinly, and say, "It's very nice, but my Leo has always preferred his steak just a little rarer. You'll learn." Leo would just offer a nervous laugh and pat my shoulder. "That's just Mom," he'd say, as if her cruelty was a charming personality quirk. He never once stood up for me. The cracks in our perfect life started to show a few months ago. It began with a feeling of being tired. It wasn't the kind of tired that a good night's sleep could fix. It was a deep, heavy exhaustion that settled in my bones and never left. One evening, I curled up next to Leo on the sofa and leaned my head against his shoulder. "I just feel so drained lately," I murmured. He didn't take his eyes off the television. "You're probably just stressed, honey," he said, patting my leg absent-mindedly. "We've been busy." But the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. A week later, I brought it up again as we were getting ready for bed. "Leo, I'm really worried. I feel weak all the time, like my body is made of lead." He finally turned to look at me, his brow furrowed not with concern but with irritation. "Amelia, don't be so dramatic. Everyone gets tired. You just need to push through it." Beatrice, who had been over for dinner, overheard me from the hallway. "Leo's right, dear," she called out. "Modern women try to do too much. You need to learn your limits." The only one who seemed to take me seriously was Clara. She would show up with herbal teas and thick magazines, telling me to put my feet up and rest. "You need to take care of yourself, Ames," she would say, her voice full of sweet concern as she squeezed my hand. "I'm always here for you, you know that." Her words were a comfort, but sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, I'd see a flicker of something else in her eyes. It was a strange, unreadable expression that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her sympathy felt like a performance, a role she was playing perfectly. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the exhaustion was making me imagine things. This was Clara, my best friend, and Leo was my loving husband. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being utterly alone with this growing fear inside me. The beautiful picture of my life was starting to tear at the edges, and I was terrified of what would happen when it finally ripped apart. The bone-deep tiredness didn't go away. It burrowed deeper, bringing friends. A dull ache settled in my chest, a constant, unwelcome companion. I started losing weight without trying, my clothes hanging loosely on a frame I no longer recognized. I knew something was seriously wrong. I begged Leo to come to the doctor with me. "Please," I whispered one morning, clinging to his arm as he was getting dressed for work. "I'm scared to go alone." He gently pulled his arm away, his focus on buttoning his shirt. "I have a huge deadline at work, honey. I can't just leave," he said, his voice clipped and distant. "It's probably nothing, just a nasty flu. You'll be fine. Just go and see what the doctor says. Text me after. He gave me a quick, passionless kiss on the forehead and left. I stood there, listening to his car drive away, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. So, I went by myself. I sat on the crinkly paper of the examination table, my feet dangling high above the floor like a child's. The room was cold and white and smelled of cleaning supplies. I stared at a poster on the wall, showing the bones in a human hand, trying to distract myself from the knot of fear tightening in my stomach. The doctor, a man with kind eyes but a serious mouth, came in holding a folder. He didn't smile. He sat down on a rolling stool and looked at me directly. He spoke in a calm, steady voice, but his words were like stones hitting glass, shattering the fragile hope I had been holding on to. I heard phrases that didn't seem real, words that belonged to someone else's life. Words like aggressive and extensive treatment. And finally, the one I dreaded most: cancer. The room seemed to tilt. The doctor's voice became a muffled hum, as if I were underwater. I nodded and listened, but nothing was sinking in. All I could think was, I'm all alone. I don't remember driving home. I just remember finding myself in our driveway, the car in park, the engine still running. That evening, I sat Leo and Beatrice down in our living room. They were talking about a new restaurant they wanted to try. I waited for a pause, my hands trembling so badly that the tea in my cup was making little waves. I went to the doctor today, I started, my voice a fragile whisper. They found something. They did some tests. I took a shaky breath. It's cancer. I looked at Leo, my husband, my partner. I waited for him to rush over, to wrap his arms around me and tell me we would fight this together. But he didn't move. He just stared, his handsome face turning pale. And in his eyes, I saw something that broke me. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even shock. It was pure, selfish fear. He wasn't afraid for me. He was afraid for himself. Cancer? He repeated, the words sounding dirty in his mouth. Are you sure? How is that even possible? Beatrice's reaction was 1,000 times worse. She didn't offer a single word of comfort. She simply let out a long, annoyed sigh, as if I had just told her I had spilled wine on her favorite rug. Well, this is going to be very difficult, she said, looking directly at Leo, not at me. The treatments are terribly expensive, and who will take care of the house? Leo has a career to think about. In that moment, sitting in my own living room, I stopped being a person. I was no longer Amelia, his wife. I was a problem to be managed, an inconvenience that was ruining their plans. The perfect picture of my life was now ripped to shreds, and I was left all alone in the wreckage. The first round of chemotherapy was a brutal storm that raged through my body. It left me hollowed out, weak and sick in a way I never knew was possible. I lay in the stiff, sterile hospital bed, watching a clear liquid drip slowly from a bag, through a tube and into my arm. This poison, they told me, was my only hope. The constant, rhythmic beep of the machine next to my bed was the only sound in the room. All I wanted in that moment was for Leo to be there, to hold my hand and tell me I was strong, to tell me we would get through this. A small, foolish part of me thought that seeing me like this, so fragile and broken, would finally break through their coldness. I thought maybe they would see the reality of the fight I was in and remember that I was the woman Leo had promised to love in sickness and in health. He and Beatrice came to visit that afternoon. They didn't bring flowers or a magazine. They just brought themselves, standing at the foot of my bed with their arms crossed, their faces like stone. They looked more like inspectors checking on a faulty piece of equipment than family visiting a loved one. "How are you feeling?" Leo asked, and his voice was so flat and empty it was like a stranger asking for directions. "Tired," I whispered, my throat raw. It was very hard. Beatrice let out a small, impatient scoff. "Well, what did you expect? You have to be strong, Amelia. For Leo's sake, this is all very hard on him." My eyes darted to my husband, praying he would disagree, that he would tell his mother that this was hard on us. But he just nodded, his gaze fixed on a spot on the wall just behind my head. He couldn't even look at me. He took a deep breath, the kind people take before they deliver terrible news. "Amelia, we need to talk," he said. "Mom and I have been discussing this. I can't do this. It's too much." My heart, which was already beating weakly, felt like it stopped completely. What do you mean you can't do this?" The words felt thick and heavy in my mouth. "This," he said, waving a hand around the room at the IV pole, at the sterile white walls, at me lying in the bed. The sickness, the hospitals, all of it. I need a supportive environment to be successful at work. I can't have this negativity dragging me down. Tears began to stream down my face, hot against my cold skin. I was too weak to even lift a hand to wipe them away. Beatrice stepped forward, and her face held a look of cold triumph. "Leo needs a partner, Amelia, not a patient," she said, her voice sharp and final. "We are leaving." Before I could even process the cruelty of her words, Leo did something that shattered the last remaining piece of my heart. He slowly twisted the gold wedding ring off his finger. I watched, mesmerized with horror, as the simple band I had placed there on our wedding day came free. He walked to my bedside, and without even looking at me, he placed the ring on the small table next to my water cup. The little metallic clink it made was the loudest, most final sound I had ever heard. Then, they turned and walked out of the room. They didn't say goodbye. They didn't look back. I lay there, stunned into silence, staring at the ring. My husband, my life, my future. It was all gone. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, I fumbled for my phone on the bedside table. My fingers were clumsy and weak. I had to call Clara, my best friend. She would know what to do. She would come for me. I found her name and pressed the call button. The phone rang once, then went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Clara. Leave a message." Her cheerful, recorded voice was like a slap in the face. I tried again. Voicemail. A cold dread, worse than anything I had felt before, washed over me. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from an old friend from college, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. My heart leaped, hoping for a kind word. But when I read the message, the air left my lungs in a painful rush. The words on the screen blurred through my tears. "Hey, I just saw the strangest thing. A moving truck at your house. Is everything okay?" It looked like Leo was moving in with Clara. The world shrank to the 4 white walls of my hospital room. The constant, monotonous beep of the machines became my only clock, marking the seconds of a life I no longer wanted. The words from that text message played on an endless loop in my mind. Leo was moving in with Clara. My husband. My best friend. In my house. In my bed. The betrayal was a physical thing, a crushing weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. What was the point of enduring the pain of the treatment? What was the point of fighting cancer if I had nothing and no one to live for? The light inside me, the will to keep going, began to fade. I stopped eating the food the nurses brought. I stopped answering their cheerful questions. Most of the day, I would turn my face to the wall and let the tears I no longer had the energy to wipe away soak into the starchy pillowcase. The doctors would come in and talk about my progress, about the next steps, but I didn't listen. Their words were just noise. I was a ghost, haunting a broken body, just waiting to disappear completely. One gray afternoon, as I was staring at the rain streaking down the window pane, there was a soft knock on my door. I didn't answer. The door opened anyway, and a kind-faced older man in a neat dark suit stood there. He wasn't a doctor. "Miss Amelia?" he asked gently. "My name is Arthur Harrison. I was your father's lawyer. May I come in?" I gave a weak nod, not having the energy to do anything else. I remembered him vaguely from my father's funeral years ago, a quiet, dignified presence in the background. He sat down in the stiff visitor's chair, placing a worn leather briefcase on his lap. "Your father was a very wise man, Amelia," he began, his voice warm and steady. "He loved you more than anything in this world, and he was also a very good judge of character." Mr. Harrison paused, looking at me with deep, sympathetic eyes. "He was never very fond of Leo." That simple statement was the first thing that had managed to cut through the thick fog of my despair in weeks. It was a small validation, a whisper from the past that I wasn't crazy. "Before he passed away," Mr. Harrison continued, opening his briefcase, "he asked me to set up a private trust in your name. He was worried, you see. He said you had a trusting heart and he wanted to make sure you would always be protected no matter what." He pulled out a thick stack of papers bound in a blue folder. "He put everything in this trust: the house, his entire investment portfolio, and the family business that Leo has been managing. It was all to be protected for you." He leaned forward slightly. "The trust had a very special clause, Amelia. A key, hidden in all the legal language. Your father designed it so that full and immediate control of every single asset would be transferred directly to you in the event of a major life crisis, like a severe illness, or a divorce, or abandonment." My mind, slow and numb for so long, started to race. "When you were admitted to this hospital and your husband left you," Mr. Harrison said, his voice becoming firm, "that clause was triggered. Amelia, listen to me. Everything you thought you shared with him, it's not shared, it is all yours. The house he is living in with that woman, the money he is spending, the business he is running, it all belongs to you, and only you." He slid a pen and a single piece of paper toward me on the rolling table. "This document gives me the authority to act on your behalf, to protect your assets and gather the evidence we need. All you have to do is sign." For the first time in months, I felt something other than pain. It wasn't joy or relief, it was a tiny hot flicker deep inside me. It felt like anger. It felt like hope. My hand was weak and it trembled, but I picked up the pen. I looked at Mr. Harrison, my father's old friend, and I saw a lifeline. I signed my name. The ink was dark and clear on the page. It was a promise to my father, a promise to myself. I was going to fight, and I wasn't just fighting cancer anymore. The year that followed was the hardest of my life. There were days when the chemotherapy ravaged my body, leaving a metallic taste in my mouth and a bone-deep ache that felt inescapable. There were nights when the loneliness was a physical weight, and I would cry myself to sleep in the small anonymous apartment Mr. Harrison had helped me rent. In those dark moments, the ghost of the woman I used to be would whisper that it was pointless, that I should just give up. But every time that whisper came, I would close my eyes and see two things. First, the glint of my wedding ring on the cold, empty bedside table. And second, my father's kind face, and the incredible, foresightful love he had shown by protecting me even after he was gone. Those two images were my fuel. The betrayal was a different kind of poison, but in a strange way, it became the antidote to my despair. It gave me a reason to swallow the pills that made me sick, to endure the needle pricks, to get out of bed when every muscle screamed in protest. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for my father's legacy. I was fighting for justice. Mr. Harrison became my general, and his briefcase was my arsenal. He didn't bring me flowers or sympathetic cards. He brought me bank statements, property deeds, and business ledgers. While my body was at war with cancer, my mind was training for a different kind of battle. I spent my recovery reading. I learned about financial law, about property rights, about the intricate workings of the business my father had poured his soul into. The picture that emerged from those papers was uglier than I could have imagined. Leo and Clara weren't just living in my house, they were gutting my life. A ski trip to Aspen, a brand new sports car for Leo, a diamond bracelet for Clara, bought on the company credit card. They were living a lavish, stolen life while I was fighting for every breath. They had appointed Beatrice to the company board, and together, they were running my father's business into the ground, pulling out money for themselves. Each new discovery was like a fresh stab to the heart, but it also did something else. It hammered my resolve into something hard and sharp. The weak, trusting Amelia was burning away, and someone stronger was being forged in the fire. Slowly, my body began to heal. My hair, which had fallen out in sad, thin clumps, started to grow back, short and dark and defiant. I started taking walks, first just to the end of the block, then around the entire park. Those walks turned into slow jogs. I was reclaiming my strength, one step at a time. One morning, about 10 months into my recovery, I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger looking back. My face was thinner, my jawline sharper, but it was my eyes that were different. The fear and sadness were gone. In their place was a calm, steely determination that I had never seen before. The woman looking back at me was not a victim. We spent the last few months not just recovering, but preparing. With Mr. Harrison's guidance, I meticulously prepared every legal document: the eviction notice, the court order to freeze their accounts, the detailed invoice for every single dollar they had stolen. I chose the date for my return carefully, the 1-year anniversary of the day they had abandoned me. It would be a day of rebirth for me, and a day of reckoning for them. On the morning of that day, I stood in front of my mirror, fully dressed and fully healed. I was no longer a patient. I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor. And I was ready. I drove my modest second-hand car through the familiar streets of my old neighborhood. The oak trees lining the road were full and green, their leaves rustling in the late afternoon breeze. It all looked exactly the same, yet it felt like a lifetime ago that I had lived here. When I turned onto my street, my heart began to pound a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It wasn't fear or nervousness. It was the drumbeat of a battle about to begin. I parked across the street from my house. My house. The lights were blazing from every window, spilling yellow squares onto the lawn. I could hear music, a thumping bass line that vibrated through the quiet evening air, punctuated by bursts of loud laughter. They were having a party. Of course they were. Perhaps it was a celebration of their anniversary. 1 year of living their stolen life. 1 year since they had left me for dead. The irony was so thick it was almost suffocating. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times, playing it over and over during long nights of treatment and lonely afternoons of recovery. I had pictured every detail, anticipated every reaction. Now, it was real. I took a deep, centering breath, smoothed down the front of my simple black dress, and got out of the car. As I walked up the stone path, my sensible heels clicked softly on the surface. I remembered helping my father lay these stones when I was just a teenager, his hands showing me how to make them level and secure. Now, the flower beds on either side were choked with weeds. The rose bushes I had so carefully tended were overgrown and wild. A sharp pang of sadness shot through me, but I pushed it away. There was no room for sadness tonight. Tonight was for strength. I reached the front door, the same deep blue door I had chosen myself, and I rang the doorbell. The cheerful chime was immediately swallowed by the party noise inside. A moment later, the music quieted slightly, and the door swung open. It was Leo. He was holding a half-full glass of whiskey, a wide, easy smile plastered on his face, ready to welcome another guest. His smile froze, then crumbled, when he saw me. The glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the porch, splashing dark liquor across his expensive leather shoes. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pale white. He looked at me as if I were a ghost who had clawed her way out of the grave. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice a ragged, strangled sound. I didn't answer him. I offered him a small, unreadable smile and walked past him, over the threshold and into the house. The living room was crowded with their friends, people I had once considered my friends, too. The thumping music sputtered and then died completely as one by one, heads turned in my direction. A wave of silence rolled through the room, thick and heavy with shock. Every eye was on me. In the center of the room, standing beside a lavish buffet table piled high with food, were Beatrice and Clara. Beatrice's perfectly painted mouth dropped open. Clara, who had been laughing, her head thrown back, froze mid-laugh. Her face, a picture of carefree joy a second ago, became a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. Her eyes darted from me to Leo, wide with panic. I walked slowly and deliberately to the center of the room, my gaze never leaving the three of them. They stood huddled together, the architects of my deepest pain. I let the silence stretch, letting them feel the weight of my presence. They had assumed I would fade away, that I would be a sad story they could eventually forget. But here I was, healthy, strong, and in control. Finally, I spoke. My voice was calm and clear, cutting through the stunned silence like a knife. "Hello," I said, my smile never wavering. "Leo, Beatrice, Clara, I'm so sorry to interrupt your party." I reached into my small handbag and pulled out a single, plain white envelope. I held it out for them to see. "I have something for you." Leo's hand trembled as he reached out and took the envelope from me, his fingers brushing mine for a fleeting electric moment. He looked down at the plain white paper as if it were a venomous snake. Around us, the silence in the room was so complete, I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Every guest was a statue, their eyes locked on the three people at the center of the storm, the three people who had destroyed my life. With clumsy fingers, Leo tore open the seal. Clara and Beatrice pressed in closer, peering over his shoulder, their faces tight with a mixture of fear and defiance. He pulled out the papers inside. There were 3 separate documents, each one neatly stapled by Mr. Harrison's secretary. His eyes scanned the first page, and I watched the last vestiges of his composure crumble. The blood drained from his face, leaving his skin looking like wax. It was an official, legally binding eviction notice. It stated in cold, clear language that Leo, Beatrice, and Clara were illegal occupants of the property located at 124 Willow Creek Lane, a property owned solely and entirely by me, Amelia. It gave them 24 hours to remove themselves and all their personal belongings. "What is this?" Beatrice shrieked, her voice cracking the silence. She snatched the paper from Leo's hand, her eyes darting across the page. Her expression twisted from confusion to pure, undiluted fury. Leo's shaking hands moved to the second document. His breath hitched. It was a court order, signed by a judge that very morning, freezing every single bank account connected to my trust and my family's business. The accounts they had been using as their personal piggy bank, the funds they had been siphoning to pay for their cars and vacations and parties, were now sealed. Every penny was gone. Clara let out a small, choked gasp. I looked at her, my former best friend, and saw the dream she had built on my ashes turning to dust before her very eyes. But it was the third document that delivered the final, crushing blow. It was a detailed invoice, a masterpiece of accounting prepared by Mr. Harrison himself. It listed 1 full year of back rent for their illegal occupancy of my home, charged at the highest market value. It included a bill for every single dollar they had embezzled from the business, with punitive interest calculated down to the cent. It even included the projected cost of restoring the garden they had let die and repairing the wine stain now spreading across my hardwood floor. The total at the bottom of the page was a staggering number, a debt so large it would follow them for the rest of their lives. Their world had not just been changed, it had been utterly and completely annihilated. "No," Leo whispered, the papers slipping from his numb grasp and fluttering to the floor. He finally looked at me, his eyes wide and pleading with a desperation I had never seen before. "Amelia, please, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible, terrible mistake." Beatrice started yelling, her voice shrill and ugly. "You can't do this to us. This is Leo's house, too. We have rights." "No, you don't," I said, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through her hysterics like a surgeon's scalpel. "You have nothing. This house, this business, this life, you stole it. And now your time is up." Clara just stood there, her face streaked with tears. The beautiful facade she had hidden behind for years finally shattered, revealing the hollow, jealous woman she truly was. I looked at their 3 shattered faces, at the ruins of the life they had built on my suffering, and I waited to feel a surge of triumph or a spark of vengeful satisfaction. But I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, not even joy. I just felt free. I turned my back on them, on their shocked guests, and on the wreckage of their lives. I walked out of the house and didn't look back. Standing on the sidewalk under the vast, dark sky, I took a deep breath of the cool night air. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the sun on my face, even though it was the middle of the night. My past was behind me, and my future, for the first time, was completely and gloriously my own.